Welcome to your 20-minute podcast with David Brower, brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/your 20-minute podcast. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Now, here's your host, David Brower.
Hi, this is David Brower, and thank you for joining us on your 20-minute podcast today. Our special guest, Brian C. Wilson, professor of comparative religion at Western Michigan University. And Brian, welcome from, I guess you're in Michigan, and I'm in Colorado. We're both a little on the chilly side, I guess.
That's right. It's great to be with you.
Thank you so much. Great to have you here. One of the things that we were talking before we started rolling here, and you've been in your position at Western Michigan for 23 winters, as your wife would call it. And so tell me what that means, a professor of comparative religion. What does that encompass?
Well, comparative religion is the academic study of religion. So we basically use like the tools of psychology and the social sciences and history to understand a variety of different religious traditions. And so my department, for example, you can come and study Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And my specialty happens to be new religious movements in the United States. So I teach American religious history, but I really focus on the things that people used to call cults and sects, and of course today we call them new religious movements. Well,
there you go. Yeah, they got to have some kind of politically correct label, right?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because those terms used to have a kind of legitimate sociological meaning, but they're used primarily now as kind of derogatory terms in the press. So we kind of stay away from that because our whole point is to try and understand religious traditions from the inside out.
How fascinating. Well, it's so you are not only always teaching, you're always learning, aren't you?
Well, that's one of the wonderful things about my job is that, I've been doing it for 23 years, and of course I had all my schooling before that. But there's always something new to learn, some new facet, some new tradition out there, some new founder. So yeah, it's fascinating and it's endless. So
how did you get from medical microbiology at Stanford to religious studies? Well,
I decided after I finished my degree in medical microbiology, my original plan was to go off to med school.
Okay.
But then I decided I'd better go out and get a little bit of real-world experience. So I joined the Peace Corps and did that for 3 years. I was in Honduras for 2 and Dominican Republic for a year, and just loved the experience. But one of the things it did was it exposed me to a variety of religious traditions I hadn't been familiar with. And so at that point, it kind of reoriented my career goals, and I decided to come back instead of doing medical school to get a PhD in religious studies and teach about religions.
I'll be darned. Well, good for you. And so, do you get a lot of students come in and have all these epiphanies, or are they kind of well educated already, or a cross section of I don't know anything, do I know everything kind of thing?
Well, I think it's a cross section, but more on the side these days of I don't know anything.
Nice.
More and more of our students. They might come from a religious background or a religious home, but know very little even about their own traditions.
I'll be darned.
So most of our students find it really eye-opening and exciting to not only study their own traditions and learn about it from the inside out, but also to study other religious traditions as well.
Man, I wish we were closer. I'd love to take your class. That'd be fascinating.
We have a lot of fun.
I bet. You don't have an online class, right?
Well, not for, I teach actually online graduate courses these days.
Oh, okay.
We've got a certificate in spirituality, culture, and health, and I teach a class on religion and alternative medicine in the United States.
Oh my gosh, fascinating.
Yeah. That's
so
fun.
One of your most recent projects is a book about John E. Fetzer and the quest for the new age. He was, did he pass?
Was. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he was a Michigan business tycoon and lived most of his life in Kalamazoo, not too far from you, right?
That's right. Well, I'm located in Kalamazoo, so in his hometown. Yeah.
Okay. I have to think. I think think there's a professor there that I know through Songwriting with Soldiers. I'll have to think about that. Because we have some family that live in Kalamazoo, and I met a young man from Western Michigan a couple of years ago. So anyway, I'm digressing, but you have me curious now, so I have to look that up.
Uh-huh.
So Mr. Fetzer died in 1991, and what was intriguing to you about his life? What drew you to write this book?
Well, the interesting thing about John Fetzer was that most people who knew him or knew about him, and he's best well known here in Michigan and in the Midwest, is that he began one of the first commercial radio stations here in Southwest Michigan, WKZO in Kalamazoo, which is still on the air.
Wow.
And he built it into a local media empire. So he had not only radio, but he got into television and then later into cable. And so he made just lots and lots of money. He was very successful as a broadcaster. But he also, in the 1950s, managed to buy the Detroit Tigers baseball team.
My gosh.
He owned the Tigers until '83. And in fact, one of his proudest moments was the '68 World Series win of the Tigers. So most people know him from that. But he also had this really fascinating spiritual life as well, which for most of his life he kept pretty quiet. And he basically transitioned from traditional Christianity into an exploration of all sorts of things that might be called collectively metaphysical movements, and which eventually became the New Age movement in the 1980s and 1990s. So that's what I found fascinating about him, was that he had this whole kind of spiritual side that most people didn't know about.
I'll be darned. I was reading some of this. So Freemasonry, UFOlogy, parapsychology, Buddhism. He had his toes in a lot of stuff, didn't he?
Yes, he was kind of a seeker, and that's one of the kind of inspirational things about his life, was that he even, in his last decade, he was continually reading and taking on new practices and studying new traditions, and so he was always open to all sorts of new spiritual currents.
So his study, where he was and how he lived his life, is not really that unusual, I guess, if that's the right word, from your class and what you teach, right? The study of all these different things?
That's true. I think if he had had a chance to take one of my classes, he would have felt right at home. And
yeah.
But of course, he probably would have known most of the stuff. Because,
well, I was going to say he could be a guest lecturer.
Yeah. Well, he started exploring this stuff back in the 1930s, and so for decades,
wow.
he continued this kind of spiritual quest.
So, how did you find out about that? I mean, obviously, in a roundabout way, you were neighbors, I guess, so it was probably pretty easy to track some history on him. But what triggered you to go, well, this guy's got an interesting spiritual background. I want to check this out.
Well, I got really lucky because John Fetzer, in the last decades of his life, basically liquidated all his businesses and created something called the Fetzer Institute. And the Fetzer Institute was designed to basically promote his kind of spiritual vision long after he died. So you can't live in Kalamazoo and not know about the Fetzer Institute. So I knew about the Institute, and I knew about a little bit about his background. But I wrote a book about another local personage who is very interesting. That's John Harvey Kellogg, and the book was called Dr. John Harvey Kellogg and the Religion of Biologic Living. And that came to the attention of a branch of the Fetzer Institute called the Memorial Trust. And their mission is basically to preserve and promote the legacy of John Fetzer.
Okay.
And so they asked me to write up a chapter for a book they were putting together, and they liked it so much they eventually asked me to write the spiritual biography of John Fetzer.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a great opportunity. I really got lucky.
That's a goosebump moment right there, right?
Yeah.
Good for you. And so then that led to you deciding to write the book after all of that?
Yeah, because they basically turned me loose in the archives, which are housed in the Fetzer Institute, and I was lucky enough to get a year-long sabbatical from my university. And so I planted myself at the Fetzer Institute, went through the archives, which were just incredibly rich, and had material that goes all the way back to John Fetzer's childhood. And that allowed me to put together, I think, a really kind of comprehensive overview of his life, but also to kind of contextualize that within the larger kinds of spiritual movements within the United States during the 20th century. So it was a dream project, and it was just a lot of fun.
I was going to say, it probably feels like a dream sometimes.
Yeah, it does.
Right? So the book that you wrote, John E. Fetzer and the Quest for the New Age. So what was the new age that defined in his mind, and has that changed now that you've been doing your studies with him or on him?
Well, for John Fetzer, it was very interesting because he was always interested in his own kind of spiritual transformation, his own individual spiritual transformation, and encouraging other people to explore this as well. But he always felt that the importance of individual spiritual transformation was that he believed if enough people did this, it would catalyze a global spiritual transformation. And he started calling this the New Age back in the 1960s.
Wow.
Before that label really became widely, popular.
Right.
So he always had this kind of global vision, and that's essentially what the Fetzer Institute was founded for, was to promote spirituality not only at the individual level, but also in terms of a global spiritual transformation, which John Fetzer called the New Age.
It's fascinating to me, and some of the stuff that I've read about you. It's one line here that, where is that? Oh, Wilson shows that, in fact, the Midwest was the first cradle of advanced spiritual expansion long before California claimed that mantle. So that's fascinating to me because not very many people knew that, I would think.
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in California, and I always thought that it was the birthplace of all these interesting kinds of esoteric and metaphysical movements.
Yeah.
But it turns out I was pleasantly surprised when I moved to the Midwest to find out that a lot of these traditions either started here or had a significant presence here in the late 19th century, and that a lot of people who then transplanted from the Midwest to California took those traditions with them. So the Midwest has long had this very interesting alternative religious history that most people don't know about. And that, of course, is exactly what John Fetzer tapped into when he started his own kind of spiritual quest.
And that's exactly one of the many reasons, I'm sure, that you wrote this book, to bring all that to the forefront and let people know not only what's been going on, but what is going on even after his death.
Yes, well, it continues to be a really vibrant region in terms of spiritual exploration. So there are still lots of interesting new religious movements in the region, and it continues to spawn new ones as well. So
fascinating. Obviously, I mean, you spent a year sabbatical studying this man and going through the archives and all those kinds of things. Were there any moments that were really aha moments for you that really surprised you when you were going through all that material?
Well, one of the things that surprised me was just how much Fetzer's interest in radio kind of precipitated his spiritual quest. Because early on, when he was just a child, he was introduced to radio by one of his brother-in-laws, and they built a little crystal radio set together, and this was way back in, I guess he was 11 or 12 years old. And John Fetzer, even in his 80s, talked about how he was just absolutely fascinated by the fact that you can have this little device and it can draw in music and voice and all these things over the air. And he said it was at that point he started speculating about the connection between radio waves and other electromagnetic radiation and subtle energies. And so he began thinking that there had to be a connection, a close connection, a kind of continuum of energies that went all the way from the material world to the spiritual.
Wow.
So it was this technology, especially this very primitive technology back when he was a kid, that kind of sparked these kinds of interests in things spiritual, but also the connection between science and spirituality.
How fascinating. I was in radio for 28 years, so that really fascinates me, and I'm intrigued by that a lot. And now I'm blessed to have a very spiritual life, and so I'm anxious to read your book. Your team was very nice to send me a copy of it, so I appreciate that. The book hardcover editions available at Barnes & Noble, other selected bookstores, and of course you can get it online and at barnesandnoble.com. There's also a Kindle edition, if I remember right.
That's correct.
And can people reach out to you if they have questions about Mr. Fetzer, or should they just take a look at purchasing the book, or what would you encourage our listeners to do to become more aware about this new age?
Well, of course, I would love everybody to go out and buy a copy of the book. As you said, it is available also as a e-book, as a Kindle edition. But also there are a couple of online places people can go. The Fetzer Institute itself has a very nice website, and it's simply Fetzer.org. And the Memorial Trust, who commissioned this book, has a website called infinitepotential.com. And there, people can go and actually download a free PDF of the preface and first chapter to the book. So that'll give you a kind of taste.
Oh, nice.
In case you'd like to go on and read more. And also, it also has information about the ongoing programs in the Memorial Trust.
Infinite
and of course,
Potential. I love the name of that.
Yeah. They did a very nice job on the website. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
How cool. So I'm just looking here. You can get the Kindle edition, folks, for 99 cents. You can get the hardcover for $32.91. And there's some other books here that you have. One you mentioned, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg and the Religion of Biological Living, Yankees in Michigan, Discovering the Peoples of Michigan, The Pocket Idiot's Guide to Christianity. Oh, that's a must-have. I got to get that. And what is religion? Origins, definitions, and explanations. Studies in the history of religions. Christianity, Religions of the World. I did an audiobook. I'm trying to think of the name of it. History of the Christian Religion from a Historical Point of View, written by Dr. Henry Epps. And I did an audiobook for him, and that was, my gosh, so fascinating. And you've got a lot of books here. Man, you got me intrigued. I'm gonna get a couple of these. So congratulations. There's no coincidence, I don't think, on you going from California to Michigan to having these great moments with the Fetzer Memorial Trust and the Institute. It's like you were destined to have this quest, don't you think?
Well, in hindsight, it certainly appears that way. Of course, as you live your life, you never see the patterns. But
for sure.
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
Yeah, I love 20/20 hindsight. It's one of my favorite places to go. Hey, thank you so much, Brian, and it's fascinating to talk with you, and I'm really curious to read more on this book and to read some of your other books. And again, infinitepotential.com and then Fetzer.org are the two places to check. And, of course, you can go to Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all these places and not only find the John E. Fetzer and the Quest for the New Age book, but Brian's other books as well. Brian, it's been a real pleasure, man. Really thrilled to talk to you today.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Your 20-minute podcast with David Brower has been brought to you by Audible. You can listen to any of David's podcasts anywhere podcasts can be found, including iHeartRadio, the Spotify mobile app, and at davidbrowervo.com/your20-minute podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.